Commander Hannah Kim had seen many things during her years serving Earth's interests in the galaxy, but nothing quite like this. The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of alien species gathered for what everyone knew would be bad news. The holographic projectors hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the assembled representatives. When the Zilani ambassador's image appeared, Hannah felt her stomach drop. The aquatic creature looked nothing like the composed diplomat she had met just weeks earlier. Its usually graceful tentacles writhed frantically, and its large eyes darted around, as if expecting death to arrive at any moment. Water dropped from its gills in rapid bursts, a sure sign of extreme panic among its people. "Council members," the Zilani began, its voice shaking through the universal translator, "our world is dying. The ancient machines we thought were just ruins have awakened. They are killing everything that lives and breathes." The ambassador paused, struggling to maintain composure. "Systematic extermination of all organic matter has begun. Our scientists estimate 72 hours before complete colony termination." The image flickered as explosions erupted in the background of the transmission. Hannah could see the panic in the Zilani's movements as it continued speaking despite the chaos around it. "We have tried everything. Our weapons do nothing. Our shields cannot stop them. We beg any species in this council who might have the power to help us. Please, 2.3 million of my people will die if no one comes." Then, the screen went black. Static filled the air for several long seconds before the communication array finally shut down completely. The silence that followed felt heavy and oppressive. Hannah looked around the chamber and saw the same expression on every alien face, regardless of species: fear. The Vorthok delegate was the first to break the silence. Its crystalline body chimed with a sound like breaking glass, which their translators converted into words of mourning. "This is beyond tragic. 2.3 million innocent lives. The Zilani have never harmed anyone. They are one of the most peaceful species in known space." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. The Zilani were beloved by most species for their gentle nature and incredible artistic abilities. Their underwater cities were considered among the most beautiful in the galaxy. The thought of losing such a peaceful civilization was devastating to everyone present. The Phelan representative's gaseous form began to shimmer with what Hannah recognized as anxiety patterns. "Perhaps our focus should be on evacuation of the surrounding systems," it suggested, its voice carrying an odd whistling quality. Historical records show these are destroyer-class war machines from the ancient civilization. No military force in recorded galactic history has ever successfully engaged them and survived. More worried voices joined the conversation. The insectoid Cathera delegate clicked its mandibles nervously. The Ancient Ones built those machines during their final war. They were designed to eliminate all organic life with maximum efficiency. Even our most advanced weapons barely scratched similar units discovered in archaeological sites. That's when Jin Park, Earth's ambassador to the Council, cleared his throat from his seat in the back. The sound was quiet, but somehow every being in the chamber heard it clearly. Hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the human representative. Some looked curious, others appeared almost amused. Earth was still considered the new kid on the galactic block. "Earth volunteers to attempt the rescue mission," Jin said simply, his voice carrying the steady confidence that had helped him negotiate humanity's entry into the Galactic Council just 2 years earlier. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Alien voices erupted in dozens of languages, creating a chaos of sounds that overwhelmed even the advanced translation systems. When the noise finally died down, the translations began catching up with what had been said. The Cathora delegates' clicking became more pronounced. "Surely the Deathworlders cannot be serious about this. Your species only achieved faster than light travel 15 years ago. You have no experience with ancient technology." Admiral June Lee had faced hostile audiences before, but nothing quite like the Galactic Council's military committee. The meeting room felt like a courtroom where he was already convicted. Every alien officer present looked at him with the same expression, polite pity mixed with barely hidden irritation. They clearly thought humans were about to waste everyone's time with their primitive technology and stubborn pride. The holographic display in the center of the room showed exactly why they felt this way. The destroyer-class war machine rotated slowly in three-dimensional detail, and June had to admit it was intimidating. The thing was massive, easily the size of a small mountain, with sleek metallic surfaces that seemed to absorb light. Weapons ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some ancient predator, and energy readings showed defensive systems that could probably stop anything the galaxy's military forces could throw at it. General Vextar of the Hegemony dominated the room with his imposing presence. Standing nearly 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms, he had led successful campaigns against some of the galaxy's most dangerous threats. Right now, those arms were crossed in a gesture that clearly said he thought this entire meeting was a waste of time. Admiral Lee Vexter began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed, without question. Let me be direct. Your species uses projectile weapons, bullets and missiles powered by chemical explosions. These machines were built to fight civilizations far more advanced than yours. Their adaptive shielding systems can analyze and counter kinetic threats within seconds of first contact. The general gestured toward the hologram, highlighting sections of the machine's hull. Our most powerful plasma cannons, weapons that can crack the surface of a moon, barely left scorch marks on similar units. We've encountered in archaeological sites. What exactly do you think metal projectiles will accomplish? The Centaurian war leader leaned forward, its insectoid features clicking with what June had learned was their equivalent of nervous laughter. Perhaps the humans plan to use their nuclear arsenal. Though surely even Deathworlders understand that atomic weapons would irradiate the very colony we are trying to save. The Zalani survivors would die from radiation poisoning, even if we somehow destroyed the machines. June studied the tactical data streaming across his personal display. Numbers, energy readings, structural analyses, weapon capabilities. On the surface, it looked hopeless. The machines outgunned anything humanity had ever built by orders of magnitude. Their defenses could adapt to threats in real time. Their programming was focused on one simple goal: eliminate all organic life with maximum efficiency. But June had seen impossible odds before. During the Amazon reclamation wars, his forces had been outnumbered 50-1 by automated defense systems protecting illegal mining operations. The Antarctic resource conflicts had pitted human soldiers against environmental hazards that should have killed them all within hours. In both cases, victory had come not from superior firepower, but from thinking differently than the enemy expected. We'll manage without nuclear weapons, June said quietly, his eyes still focused on the tactical display. Our approach will be unconventional. The word unconventional seemed to amuse the assembled alien commanders. June could see them exchanging glances that needed no translation. The humans were clearly planning to march straight into annihilation, with the same stubborn determination that had somehow gotten them this far in galactic politics. A Phelan admiral, its gaseous form shimmering with what June recognized as barely controlled frustration, spoke up through its translation device. Admiral, with respect, unconventional tactics require superior technology to implement effectively. Your species has been spacefaring for barely 2 decades. These machines have been perfecting warfare for millions of years. Vexter uncrossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, clearly ready to end this meeting. Very well, Admiral Lee. If Earth insists on this course of action, we will not stand in your way. We'll position our fastest rescue vessels at the edge of the system to evacuate any survivors when your assault inevitably fails. Perhaps your sacrifice will buy us enough time to warn the other colonies in the region and prepare better defenses. The dismissal was obvious, but June didn't take offense. He had heard similar predictions before every major operation of his career. Humans had a reputation for attempting impossible missions, and that reputation existed because they often succeeded, in ways no one expected. Appreciated, June replied with a slight smile that made several aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. We'll need 48 hours to mobilize our fleet and gather the necessary equipment. Captain Minho Choi stood on the observation deck of Luna Station, watching what had to be the strangest military preparation in galactic history. The massive loading bays buzzed with activity as human dock workers moved equipment that would have made any alien military strategist scratch their heads in confusion, where other species would be loading sophisticated energy weapons and quantum-enhanced missiles. Humans were carefully securing what looked like construction materials and mining equipment. The sight was almost comical. Enormous tungsten rods, each one weighing several tons, were being loaded into specialized launching tubes. These weren't the sleek, energy-based projectiles that most civilizations used in modern warfare. They were simple metal bars, dense and heavy, designed to do nothing more complex than hit their target really, really hard. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like humans were planning to throw rocks at the most advanced war machines in galactic history. Lieutenant Narration appeared beside him, her electronic datapad glowing with endless inventory lists. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen as she checked off items that would have puzzled military experts from dozens of worlds. The railgun ammunition is all secured in Bay 7, sir, she reported with the efficiency that had made her one of Earth's top logistics officers. Engineering Corps finished modifying the mining charges about an hour ago. They're ready for vacuum deployment. Minho nodded, still watching the loading process. Chemical explosives were being carefully placed in specialized containers designed to function in the vacuum of space. These weren't sophisticated weapons either. They were essentially the same explosive charges that human miners used to break through stubborn rock formations on asteroid mining operations. The only difference was some modifications to ensure they would detonate properly in airless environments. What about the special cargo in Bay 12? Minho asked, curious about the one area that had been sealed off, even from his oversight. Nara's serious expression broke into a grin that suggested she knew something interesting. Colonel Day has that section locked down tighter than a submarine. Says it's need-to-know information, and apparently we don't need to know. I tried asking one of his engineers about it, but all I got was a mysterious smile and something about creative problem-solving. Through the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the observation deck, Earth hung in space like a perfect blue and white marble. It was beautiful from this distance, serene and peaceful-looking. Most alien species who had studied humanity's homeworld had come to very different conclusions about what they were seeing. To them, Earth was a nightmare planet where natural disasters constantly reshaped the surface, where violent weather systems could destroy entire cities, and where the very atmosphere had once been poisonous to most forms of life. But humans saw something completely different when they looked at their home. They saw a world that had taught them to adapt to anything, to find solutions when there seemed to be none, and to survive in conditions that would kill most other species. Earth hadn't just produced humans. It had forged them into something unique in the galaxy. The alien military observer assigned to monitor human preparations approached with obvious confusion written across its features. The Kelthari was a methane-breathing species that required a full environmental suit to survive in the oxygen-rich atmosphere humans preferred. Its voice came through the suit's speaker system with a distinctly puzzled tone. Captain Choi, the observer said, its sensors scanning the loading bay activities. Our detection equipment shows no plasma generators, no quantum disruptors, no gravitic manipulation devices. These appear to be purely mechanical weapon systems. How do you expect such primitive devices to penetrate technology created by the ancients. Minho finished securing his helmet and checked the seals on his environmental suit. He was headed to the shuttle bay for the final inspection of their fleet, and he wanted to make sure everything was ready. The question from the Kelthari observer was one he had been hearing from alien military experts for the past 2 days, and his answer remained the same. "Sometimes the old ways work best," he said simply, heading toward the shuttle bay exit. Complex problems don't always require complex solutions. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like ghosts, materializing from the void. "Commander Yu..." Park felt the familiar sensation of her stomach settling as the artificial gravity systems compensated for the transition back to normal space. Around her, the bridge of the flagship Indomitable hummed with quiet efficiency as her crew began their scans of what had once been a peaceful star system. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The tactical display painted a picture that made even veteran space officers feel sick to their stomachs. Kepler 442, which had been known throughout the galaxy for its beautiful blue oceans and floating crystal cities, now looked like a patient on an operating table being systematically dissected by mechanical surgeons. "Sensor report," Yuna ordered, her voice steady despite the horror unfolding on her screens. Ensign Quan, barely 22 years old and on his first deep space mission, tried to keep the shock out of his voice as he read from his instruments. 47 destroyer-class units confirmed active on the planetary surface. Each unit measures approximately 12 kilometers in length. They appear to be conducting systematic strip mining operations while simultaneously processing all organic matter they encounter. The main viewing screen flickered and then displayed the surface of Kepler 44 to be in high resolution. What Yuna saw made her jaw clench with anger. Where satellite images from just a week ago had shown green continents covered with the Zelanis, beautiful underwater cities, now only metallic scars stretched across barren, lifeless rock. The planet looked like it had been attacked by a swarm of mechanical locusts that consumed everything in their path. The destroyer machines moved across the surface with terrifying precision. Each one was a mountain of metal and death, equipped with mining beams that could slice through solid rock like a knife through butter. As Yuna watched, one of the machines fired its primary beam at what appeared to be a forest. The trees, the soil, even the insects and small animals living there, were instantly converted into their basic atomic components and sucked up into the machine's processing chambers. "What about Zelani survivors?" Yuna asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know how many lives they might still be able to save. Quan's fingers danced across his control panel as he refined the sensor sweeps. "I'm detecting approximately 400,000 life signs in underground bunker systems. But Commander, ... His voice trailed off as more data appeared on his screen. "Report, Ensign," Yuna said firmly. "The bunker integrity is failing rapidly. The machines are conducting systematic bombardment of any underground structures they detect. Based on current destruction rates, I estimate the survivors have maybe 18 hours before their shelters collapse completely." The bridge fell silent, except for the quiet humming of electronics and life support systems. 18 hours. Less than a day to somehow defeat 47 war machines that had been specifically designed to kill everything alive on a planet. Machines that were each larger than most human cities and armed with weapons that could reduce mountains to dust. Lieutenant Colonel Jin Woo stepped up beside Yuna's command chair. His scarred face showed the calm expression of a man who had survived impossible odds before. "Ma'am, we're already receiving hostile targeting locks from all 47 units. They detected us the moment we dropped out of hyperspace. No communication attempts, no warnings, nothing." Yuna nodded grimly. She had read the historical files about the ancient civilization that built these monsters. When their own species faced extinction, they had decided that if they couldn't live, then nothing else in the galaxy deserved to live either. These machines weren't programmed for negotiation or mercy. They had one simple directive: find organic life, and destroy it with maximum efficiency. The tactical display showed red targeting beams already locking onto every ship in the human fleet. In a few minutes, those same beams would start firing weapons capable of vaporizing entire starships. Most military commanders would have ordered an immediate retreat at this point. The smart play was to run, warn the galaxy about the threat, and hope someone else could figure out a solution. But Una Park hadn't been chosen to command this mission because she made smart plays. She had been chosen because she specialized in winning impossible fights. "All ships, implement Alpha Protocol," she announced over the fleet communication system. "Time to show these antiques what a death world teaches you about survival." The attack began in a way that would have looked familiar to anyone who had ever witnessed a meteor shower, except these falling stars had a deadly purpose. The first wave of tungsten rods streaked through Kepler-442b's atmosphere like silver lightning, their surfaces glowing white-hot from the friction of atmospheric entry. But unlike natural meteors, these projectiles had sophisticated guidance systems and enough kinetic energy to punch through virtually any known material in the galaxy. The magnetic rail systems aboard the human fleet had accelerated these simple metal rods to incredible speeds, turning them into weapons that carried more destructive force than most nuclear warheads. When they slammed into the destroyer-class machines, the impact created explosions of light and heat that could be seen from orbit. The beautiful thing about kinetic weapons was their simplicity. No complex energy systems to be disrupted, no shields that could adapt to their frequency. Just pure, devastating momentum. Colonel Tae Kim's drop pod hit the surface like a controlled meteorite, its impact cushioning systems barely managing to keep him alive as he crashed into what had once been the center of a magnificent Solani city. Around him, the ruins of crystal spires and flowing water gardens told the story of a peaceful civilization that had been caught completely unprepared for mechanized death. The moment his pod's doors blew open, energy beams began carving molten trenches through the rubble around him. The ancient war machines had detected his landing and were already adjusting their weapons to eliminate this new threat. Their plasma cannons could have vaporized a small building with each shot, but they seemed confused by a target that moved in ways their programming couldn't predict. "Squad leaders, sound off." Tay barked into his communication system as he rolled behind the twisted remains of what might have been a Zalani art installation. Superheated air rushed past his helmet as another energy beam barely missed his position. "Echo team in position and ready," came the immediate response from Sergeant Young Ha. Her voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of impossible situation. "These machines don't seem to know how to deal with small unit tactics. Their targeting systems keep trying to lock onto us like we're large spacecraft." That was exactly what Tay had been hoping to hear. The destroyer machines had been built to fight the kind of warfare that civilized species preferred, massive fleets exchanging energy weapons at long range, with predictable movement patterns and logical tactical formations. They had never been programmed to deal with individual soldiers who moved like the persistence hunters that had once dominated Earth's African plains. Lieutenant Su Jin was already implementing the next phase of their plan, while the machines focused their attention on the obvious targets moving above ground. She crawled through maintenance tunnels that their sensors couldn't detect. The shaped charges she carried had been designed for mining operations on Earth's most dangerous asteroid fields, but they would work just as well for demolishing the support structures that kept these mechanical mountains upright. "Target acquired." Her voice crackled through the communication system. "Beginning demolition of primary support struts." These things built themselves like skyscrapers, which means they have the same structural weaknesses above ground. Captain One-Seek's artillery teams had found covered positions in the ruins and were beginning their own contribution to the chaos. Their weapons looked primitive compared to the energy cannons that most galactic militaries preferred, but there was something to be said for explosive shells that followed ballistic trajectories. The machine's shields were designed to stop direct energy attacks from the front, but they seemed confused by projectiles that arced high into the air before coming down from above. The targeting calculations required for indirect fire would have challenged most artificial intelligence systems. But human artillery officers had learned their trade by hunting creatures that could dodge, weave, and think 3 steps ahead of their pursuers, compared to tracking a wounded tiger through dense jungle. Calculating the trajectory needed to drop explosive shells onto a stationary target was relatively simple. First wave of charges detonated successfully, Sujin reported as one of the destroyer machines began listing to one side, its internal structure compromised by explosions in exactly the right places, moving to secondary targets. These things really don't like it when you attack their foundations. The battle was just beginning, but already the humans were proving something that the galaxy's military experts had thought impossible. Sometimes, the old ways of fighting were exactly what you needed against an enemy that had prepared for everything except primitive ingenuity. The sky above, Kepler 4-4 to be suddenly filled with streaks of brilliant light, as if the stars themselves were falling toward the planet's surface. But these weren't natural meteors burning up in the atmosphere. Each glowing projectile was a carefully crafted tungsten rod, dense and heavy, accelerated by powerful magnetic systems to speeds that defied imagination. When they struck their targets, the impact released energy equivalent to small nuclear explosions, but without the radiation that would have poisoned the very people they were trying to save. The magnetic rail launchers aboard the human fleet had turned simple metal bars into weapons of incredible destruction. There was something beautifully straightforward about the concept. Take a really heavy object, throw it really fast, and let physics do the rest. No complex energy matrices to disrupt, no quantum frequencies to jam, just pure kinetic force delivered with surgical precision. Colonel Tae Kim felt his drop pod shudder and groan as it plunged through the planet's atmosphere, its heat shields glowing cherry red from the friction. Through the small viewport, he could see the devastation below. What had once been a thriving Zalani city was now a wasteland of twisted metal and broken crystal structures. The pod's targeting system guided it toward a landing zone in what used to be the city center, where the beautiful floating gardens had been reduced to scattered debris. The impact jarred every bone in his body, despite the advanced shock absorption systems. Before the pod had even finished settling, plasma beams began striking the ground around his position. The ancient war machines had detected his arrival within seconds, and were already trying to eliminate this new threat with weapons that could melt solid rock. Tay kicked open the pod's emergency exit and rolled out into the ruins, his combat armor automatically adjusting to the hostile environment. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the ground beneath his feet was still warm from recent energy weapon strikes. Massive destroyer machines loomed in the distance like mechanical mountains, their weapons systematically reducing everything around them to component atoms. Squad leaders, sound off, he called into his communication system. Diving behind the twisted remains of what might have been a Zalani sculpture, as another plasma beam carved a glowing trench through the rubble, just meters from his position. Echo team in position and operational, came the immediate response from Sergeant Young Ha. Her voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario. These machines are having trouble with our movement patterns. Their targeting systems keep trying to track us like we're large vehicles or spacecraft. That was exactly what Tay had hoped to hear. The destroyer machines were products of an ancient civilization that had fought wars very differently from humans. They expected enemies to move in predictable formations, to engage at long range with sophisticated energy weapons, and to follow the logical tactical doctrines that most advanced species preferred. They had never encountered opponents who moved like pack hunters, using terrain and unpredictable movement to confuse and overwhelm their targets. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Sujin was putting the second phase of their plan into action, while the massive machines focused their attention on the obvious targets moving above ground. She had found access to the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the city. These passages were too small for the machine's sensors to monitor effectively, and they provided perfect cover for someone carrying the kind of specialized equipment that could bring down structures the size of skyscrapers. Target acquired, and confirmed, her voice crackled through the communication system as she positioned her first set of charges, beginning demolition of primary support struts. These machines built themselves like enormous buildings, which means they have the same structural vulnerabilities. Take out the right support beams, and even something this massive will fall. The shaped charges she carried had originally been designed for mining operations in Earth's asteroid belt, where precision explosions were needed to extract valuable minerals without destroying them. But the same principles that worked for breaking apart space rocks would work just as well for taking down the internal framework that kept these mechanical monsters upright and functional. Above ground, Captain One-Seek's artillery teams had found excellent positions among the ruins and were beginning their own contribution to the coordinated assault. Their weapons looked almost primitive compared to the energy cannons that dominated modern galactic warfare, but there was something to be said for explosive shells that followed simple ballistic trajectories. The machine's energy shields were designed to deflect direct attacks from the front, but they seemed completely unprepared for projectiles that flew high into the air. Before dropping down from above, Major Hyenwoo crouched behind the shattered remains of what had once been a beautiful Zalani concert hall. His portable command center spread across a makeshift table of broken crystal and twisted metal. The tactical displays showed information that would have terrified most military commanders. The enemy was getting smarter, fast. Commander Park, he spoke into his communication headset, trying to keep his voice steady as energy beams carved new scars into the ruins around him. The machines are learning from our attack patterns. I'm seeing definite adaptation in their targeting algorithms. They're starting to track individual infantry signatures instead of treating us like large vehicles. From orbit, Commander Yuna Park studied the same battlefield data that Hyenwoo was seeing on the ground, but from a perspective that let her see the bigger picture. The holographic displays around her showed the positions of every human unit, every destroyer machine, and every weapon strike in real time. It was like watching a deadly chess game where one side was starting to figure out the other's strategy. The machines had been built by a civilization that understood the importance of learning from combat experience. After the first hour of fighting, their artificial intelligence systems had begun analyzing human movement patterns, weapon trajectories, and tactical decisions. They were starting to predict where human soldiers would move next, where artillery strikes would land, and which targets would be attacked first. Their predictive systems are impressive, Yuna admitted, watching red warning indicators appear across her tactical display as more human units came under increasingly accurate fire. But they're still thinking like civilized military strategists. They expect logical progression and rational decision-making. She paused, remembering her training exercises in the chaos of Earth's worst natural disasters. Hurricanes didn't follow logical patterns. Earthquakes didn't strike at convenient times. Volcanic eruptions didn't care about military doctrine. Humans had learned to survive by adapting to complete unpredictability. "Implement Protocol 7, she ordered. Lieutenant Kong looked up from his monitoring station with obvious concern. "Ma'am, that's the Chaos Doctrine. Command specifically labeled it for emergency use only. It goes against every principle of modern military strategy." "This qualifies as an emergency," Yuna replied, her fingers already inputting the authorization codes that would change everything about how their forces operated. The order went out across all communication channels, and the effect was immediate and startling. Across the battlefield, human units began implementing tactics that would have made military academy instructors question their sanity. Soldiers who had been moving in careful coordinated patterns suddenly started running in completely random directions. Artillery teams that had been targeting logical strategic points began firing at locations that served no obvious tactical purpose. Infantry squads abandoned their carefully planned objectives and started attacking whatever targets happened to be closest to them. Scout teams began reporting false information, mixed randomly with accurate intelligence. Supply convoys started delivering ammunition to units that didn't need it, while ignoring requests from teams that were running low. To any observer trained in conventional warfare, it looked like the human forces had suddenly lost their minds. There was no apparent strategy, no coordination, no logical progression toward any military objective. It was complete and utter chaos. The machine intelligence systems tried desperately to process what they were seeing. Their advanced predictive algorithms, designed to analyze and counter rational military thinking, began producing error messages as they attempted to find patterns that simply didn't exist. The machines had been programmed to fight enemies who followed logical tactical doctrines, not opponents who seemed to have abandoned reason entirely. Sergeant Bo Young exemplified the new approach perfectly. She led her squad in what appeared to be a suicidal frontal assault against a destroyer, machine's most heavily armored section, screaming ancient Korean war cries at the top of her lungs. The sounds served no military purpose whatsoever, except that they had once been used to terrify human enemies in battles fought thousands of years ago. The machine's targeting systems immediately focused on this obvious threat, treating the screaming soldiers as the primary danger that needed to be eliminated first, while its weapons concentrated on Bo Young's deliberately conspicuous attack. 7 separate combat engineering teams approached from completely different directions. They weren't following any coordinated plan, except for their shared goal of finding interesting places to set off explosives. The beautiful thing about chaos, Yuna murmured to herself, watching explosion patterns bloom randomly across her tactical display, like deadly flowers, is that we learned to thrive in it. These machines are trying to impose order on a species that grew up in a universe that doesn't care about order. The ancient war machines, for the first time in their existence, were encountering something their creators had never imagined. An enemy that fought better when they stopped trying to make sense. Captain Sejin checked her equipment one final time before beginning her descent into what most species would have considered a death trap. The shaft had once been part of the Zolani's elegant transportation system, with flowing water channels that carried their aquatic citizens through the city in graceful currents. Now, it was a twisted maze of collapsed metal and broken crystal, filled with radiation that would cook most aliens' life forms in minutes. Her suit's environmental sensors were practically screaming warnings at her. Structural integrity was failing throughout the tunnel system. The air was thick with toxic particles that would dissolve the respiratory systems of dozens of species. Radiation levels were climbing toward lethal doses. The temperature fluctuated wildly between freezing cold and scalding heat as damaged systems vented their contents into the tunnels, but Sajin had trained for exactly this kind of environment. The deep ocean trenches of Earth, where pressure could crush submarines and volcanic vents, spewed chemicals that would melt most materials. The frozen wastelands of Antarctica, where a single equipment failure meant certain death, and the weather could change from survivable to lethal in minutes. Compared to the places where humans learned to operate, this tunnel felt like a moderately challenging training exercise. Her rappelling gear lowered her steadily through the debris-filled shaft, as her helmet lights cut through the darkness ahead. The Zolani had built their city with beauty in mind, not defensibility, which meant that when the ancient machines attacked, their elegant structures had provided almost no protection. But it also meant there were lots of small spaces and hidden passages where survivors could hide from mechanical death. Zolani survivors located and confirmed. She reported into her communication system as her lights illuminated a makeshift shelter carved into what had been a service tunnel. A group of terrified aquatic beings huddled together in the small space, their normally graceful movements reduced to panicked trembling. Beginning immediate extraction procedures. I count 43 individuals, mostly civilians, with some technical personnel. The Zilani survivors looked up at her with expressions of hope, mixed with disbelief. They had been trapped underground for days, listening to the sounds of their world being systematically destroyed above their heads. Most had probably given up hope of rescue entirely. The sight of a human in full combat armor, dropping down from above like some kind of technological angel, must have seemed impossible. Above ground, the battle had evolved into something that military historians would probably spend decades trying to understand. Human forces had managed to disable 17 of the massive destroyer machines, using tactics that defied every principle of conventional warfare. Instead of organized battle lines and coordinated attacks, the humans had embraced complete tactical chaos, attacking from unexpected directions and using weapons that no civilized military would have considered. Lieutenant Minesio crawled out of a maintenance hatch in the side of a disabled destroyer machine, her demolition pack completely empty and her armor showing scorch marks from multiple energy weapon hits. She had spent the last 4 hours inside the machine's internal structure, finding critical systems and introducing them to carefully placed explosive charges. Primary reactor successfully disabled, she reported, wiping sweat from her face as she surveyed the now silent mechanical mountain. This unit is permanently offline. It won't be processing any more organic matter or contributing to the systematic destruction of this planet. The rescue operation proceeded with the kind of methodical efficiency that humans brought to impossible tasks. Special forces teams that had been trained to operate in Earth's most hostile environments moved through areas that the machines had declared completely uninhabitable. They located groups of survivors hiding in collapsed buildings, established safe passage routes through the ruins, and evacuated terrified civilians, while combat units kept the remaining active machines distracted with increasingly creative forms of destruction. Final transport has departed the surface, reported Commander Jin Young from the evacuation fleet in orbit. All Zilani survivors have been secured and are receiving medical attention. Total count is 412,000 individuals successfully extracted. Down on the planet's surface, Colonel Tae Kim stood among the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city, looking up at the 30 destroyer machines that were still operational. His armor was scarred, his ammunition was running low, and his soldiers were exhausted from hours of impossible combat. But there was something in his expression that would have worried anyone who knew humans well. All units, prepare for Phase 2 operations, he announced over the communication system. Time to finish this job properly. The massive chamber of the Galactic Council had hosted discussions about wars, trade disputes, and planetary colonization rights, but it had never experienced a silence quite like this one. Representatives from dozens of species sat in their designated areas, staring at the holographic displays that showed the impossible, the final destroyer-class machine collapsing in on itself. As human combat engineers triggered a series of perfectly timed explosions that turned the mechanical mountain into a pile of expensive scrap metal. The images were almost surreal. Kepler 442b's surface was covered with scars from the battle, but green was already beginning to show in places where the planet's natural healing processes were taking hold. The ancient threat that had haunted galactic nightmares for thousands of years was now reduced to twisted metal and broken circuits, scattered across a world that would live to see another sunrise. Ambassador Jin Park walked to the center of the chamber with the same steady confidence he had shown when volunteering for what every expert had called a suicide mission. His formal diplomatic clothes were perfectly pressed, his expression was calm and professional, and there was nothing in his demeanor to suggest that he had just overseen the most impossible military victory in recorded galactic history. The silence stretched on until General Vexstar finally broke it. The four-armed military commander who had led successful campaigns, against some of the galaxy's most dangerous threats, looked completely defeated. His massive frame seemed to have shrunk, and his arms hung at his sides, as if they had forgotten their purpose. "How did you do it?" Vexter's voice carried a tone of bewilderment that his subordinates had never heard before. "Those machines destroyed 3 of our most advanced battle fleets without taking significant damage. They had energy weapons powerful enough to crack the surface of moons. Their defensive systems adapted to counter every attack pattern we tried." Jin took a moment to consider his response, looking around the chamber at faces that showed every emotion, from disbelief to grudging respect. These were representatives of civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel, built cities that floated in space, and developed weapons that could reshape matter at the atomic level. But none of them had been able to solve the problem that humans had just handled with what everyone had considered primitive technology. "The machines were programmed by a highly advanced civilization," Jin began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems. "They were designed to counter the kind of warfare that civilized species prefer: sophisticated energy weapons, coordinated fleet actions, and logical tactical progressions. But they had never encountered opponents who learned to fight on a planet where literally everything was constantly trying to kill them." The Cathora delegates' insectoid features clicked with obvious confusion. "But Ambassador Park, your weapons were completely primitive by our standards. Chemical explosives that any species could manufacture, kinetic projectiles with no quantum enhancement tactics that seemed to abandon all military logic." Jin smiled slightly, the kind of expression that humans used when they were about to explain something that seemed obvious to them but mystifying to everyone else. "Sometimes primitive methods work better than sophisticated ones. On Earth, we learned a very important lesson. The most technologically advanced predator can still be brought down by pack tactics, patience, and the willingness to take risks that rational analysis would immediately reject." The main display flickered and showed the image of the Zalani ambassador, whose appearance had transformed completely from their last communication. Instead of the panicked, desperate creature they had seen pleading for help, the aquatic being now moved with graceful dignity, its tentacles flowing in patterns that their translation systems identified as expressions of profound gratitude. "The humans accomplished something that our entire civilization thought was impossible," the Zalani ambassador said, its voice warm with emotion that carried clearly through the translation matrix. "They saved 2.3 million lives using methods that we never would have considered, never would have imagined. They fought machines that were specifically designed to eliminate organic life, and they won by being more organic, more unpredictable, more alive than the machines could process or understand." A secondary display activated, showing Admiral Jun Lee speaking from the bridge of the Indomitable as it maintained orbit around the now safe planet. "The fundamental difference is this," he explained, his scarred face showing the calm satisfaction of someone who had just solved a problem that had seemed impossible. "The galaxy tends to build weapons and develop tactics to counter specific, known threats. Humans learned to adapt to any threat because, on our world, the threats never stopped changing, never stopped evolving, and never gave us the luxury of preparing for just one type of danger." 6 months had passed since the impossible victory on Kepler 442b, and the changes were remarkable to see. What had once been a world stripped bare by mechanical death was now showing signs of vibrant recovery. The Zalani colony was rebuilding with a determination that surprised even their human helpers, and the landscape itself seemed to be healing from the scars left by the ancient war machines. Commander Unipark walked through the reconstructed streets of the capital city, marveling at how different everything looked from the devastated wasteland her troops had fought through. The Zalani architects had worked with human engineers to create something entirely new, buildings that combined the flowing, artistic beauty of aquatic design with the practical durability that humans insisted on for structures that might need to survive another attack. Gardens bloomed everywhere, their soil enriched by the mineral deposits left behind when the destroyer machines had been reduced to scrap metal. It was a strange kind of irony that weapons designed to eliminate all organic life had ultimately provided the nutrients that helped new life flourish more abundantly than before. In the center of the city square stood a monument that had surprised everyone, including the humans who had made its construction possible. Instead of statues depicting human soldiers or scenes from the battle, the Zalani had created something more abstract, a flowing sculpture that seemed to capture the idea of adaptation itself, showing how intelligence and flexibility could overcome even the most overwhelming obstacles. Zalani engineer Prime Thalosis glided alongside Yuna as they inspected the latest defense grid modifications. The aquatic being's movements were graceful and fluid, but the translation device it wore conveyed emotions as well as words, and you could sense the confusion that still puzzled many alien species when they tried to understand humans. Your people continue to confuse us, Thalosis admitted, its tentacles moving in patterns that indicated thoughtful perplexity. Every other civilization in galactic history has eventually developed beyond the need for primitive survival instincts. Most species evolve past the aggressive adaptability that characterizes early development. But you seem to have deliberately weaponized those very traits that others abandon. Yuna paused to watch a mixed crew of human construction workers and Zalani artists collaborating on a new building design. The humans were focused on making sure the structure could survive earthquakes, floods, and energy weapon attacks. The Zalani were equally concerned with ensuring it would be beautiful enough to inspire the people who lived and worked inside it. The combination was producing architecture unlike anything seen elsewhere in the galaxy. The difference is our planet, Yuna explained, gesturing toward the sky where Earth was visible as a tiny blue point of light. On most worlds, evolution eventually reaches a stable point where the environment becomes predictable enough that species can specialize and settle into comfortable niches, but Earth never gave us that luxury. Every generation of humans faced new challenges that required new adaptations. Climate changes, geological shifts, ice ages, volcanic periods, asteroid impacts. We learned to see constant change, not as a threat to be feared, but as an opportunity to become something better. The communication device on her wrist suddenly chimed with the distinctive tone that indicated a priority message from the Galactic Council. Yuna and Thalosis exchanged glances, both recognizing the implications. In the 6 months since the Kepler 4 to be operation, similar emergency calls had become disturbingly frequent. Commander Park, Ambassador Jin's familiar voice came through the comm system, carrying the same calm tone he had used when volunteering for what everyone had thought was a suicide mission. We have a developing situation in the Vega sector. Ancient bioweapons have been discovered and accidentally activated on 7 different colony worlds. The weapons appear to be self-replicating and are already spreading beyond the initial outbreak sites. The Council is formally requesting immediate human assistance. Yuna looked up at the city square, where Earth's flag now flew alongside the banners of dozens of other species. 6 months ago, humans had been considered the primitive newcomers to galactic civilization, barely advanced enough to deserve a seat at the council table. Now they were the first species that the galaxy called whenever survival itself was at stake. "Tell Ambassador Jin that we're on our way," she replied, already mentally calculating how quickly they could mobilize their forces, "and remind him that this is exactly why Deathworlders make the best survivors. We specialize in problems that seem impossible." Above them, human ships were already beginning to form up in orbit, their crews receiving orders and preparing for another mission that would probably be declared hopeless by every military expert in the galaxy. But there was something different in the way they moved now. A confidence that came from knowing they had already proven the impossible was just another word for interesting challenge. In the depths of space, other ancient threats were stirring, awakened by signals or accidents, or the simple passage of time. But for the first time in galactic history, There was a species that looked at such dangers and saw opportunities to demonstrate just how far adaptability and stubborn determination could take you. The Deathworlders were just getting started, and the galaxy was finally beginning to understand what that meant.